So I'm super stoked for this week because this is the unofficial official start to the 2026 growing season. So having said that, if you haven't ordered your seeds yet and you're planning on growing food this year, whatever that looks like, a few weeks ago I talked about different forms of growing, whether that be in-ground, raised beds, or containers. If you don't have seeds yet, I would recommend shopping right now. And I have the previous videos posted, so if you want to go back and review those, if you wait too long, so let's say here in usually beginning of March, here in Minnesota especially, once the weather starts warming up, that's when everybody starts thinking about growing food or gardening because the we got longer days, the snow's starting to disappear, and everybody's got cabin fever and they want to get out. What I've seen historically is that once that comes around, there's going to be fewer selections of seeds available. So a lot of the big seed companies, it's very common for them to sell out of certain varieties. So if you have, let's say, like a sweet corn for Meg's Edible Landscapes this year, I'm growing a hybrid sweet corn that I trialed last year. I liked it, did very well in the containers, and I'm going to be growing again this year. There's only one seed company that I found that actually has that hybrid. If I wait till next month, I can guarantee it's not going to be available anymore. So this is a perfect time if you haven't ordered seeds yet to start shopping. Order them, and then they'll be here, and then you don't have to think about it. The rest of the time between now and spring, when it's warm enough to actually start growing food, you can focus on other uh, items or tasks that need to be done, like planting the garden, where you plant, where you're gonna plant your crops. So if you're in ground raised beds, you can focus your attention on that. Uh, like I said, historically speaking, from my experience, if I wait till we get to warmer weather, there's going to be a lot of seed varieties that are going to be completely sold out and not available. So, having said that, like I said, this is exciting this week because this is the unofficial, official start of the 2026 growing season. I have seeds over here. So this is one of the seed companies that I ordered from called Renee's Garden out of California. And what I like about them is they're focused on container, dwarf, and smaller varieties, which work great for what I do with Mixo landscapes and the grow bags. So I just want to share a few varieties that I'm growing that work really well with the grow bags. This one right here is called Little Crunch, sugar snap pea. These have really thick pea pods, and they're smaller plants, so these pea plants will get a couple feet tall, and you can use some type of trellis. I actually use a fence that I cut up into 2 foot sections and then make a little arch, and then these guys can grab onto them. So that's called Little Crunch Snap Peas. That's one of my favorite containers. Varieties. I have, these are French beans, same thing. And the coolest thing about peas and beans, in my opinion, is if you've seen other YouTube videos where the host has talked about succession planting, this is a perfect example of succession planting, but it looks a little different. So here, pretty soon when spring starts, I'm going to be starting with the sugar snap peas, the little crunch, and then when these are finished with their life, which is it's typically the end of June, I usually don't get these going into July because here in Minnesota, we're in the heat of summer by the time 4th of July shows around. But I'll start with these. As these finish, the beans show up. And then these, it's kind of like a WWE tag team where these guys start, tag team the beans, and the beans finish the season. But that's not entirely true because once these guys are done, then I can sow these again for fall peas. And I tried this a couple years ago and it worked really well. So what I'm saying is you actually get three crops out of these two plants. So start with sugar snap peas, go to beans, and then back to some type of peas in the fall. And for the last couple of years, we've had warm falls in Minnesota, so I haven't had a problem with getting a full sugar snap pea crop before the cold weather shows up and finishes the plants off. Here's another variety I like. It's called Petite Pickles. This is again from Renee's. This is a powerhouse plant. It won't get crazy out of control, but it's not uncommon to have 40, 50 cucumbers, pickling cucumbers off that plant alone. And if you have a couple of plants, I mean, they're still in my refrigerator right now. We made refrigerator pickles last fall. Well, that's a pickling cucumber. This is called bush slicer. This is a this is a workhorse too. This will get dozens of cucumbers from one plant, and it's a very good container variety too. I like to grow every year. I have zucchini, Estia zucchini. So it's going to be quite a few months before these come out. But this is one of my favorite zucchini varieties. It's another workhorse too. So this will put out at least a dozen fruits uh, throughout the growing season. And I put these in 10-gallon grow bags, so they do need a bigger container, but once they get going, they'll do very well. Now we're into the butternut squash. So this is the same plant. Actually, I'll show you the other one too. So butternut squash, they're two varieties, but they do the same thing. What I like about them is those go in 10-gallon grow bags, 10-gallon containers. And then I have some type of trellis with those, usually a fence that I have rigged up for a customer, and then they can sprawl out on the fence, and then they just, throughout the fence you'll see little fruits appear, and then they got the fence to hang on to because their vines will go 10 feet, 10, 12 feet. They do really well in the grow bags. More cucumbers. Okay, if you like slicing cucumbers and you like ones that look cool and have good flavor, Tasmanian chocolate. I've been growing this for about 5, 6 years now. This is one of my staple workhorse slicing tomatoes. They're not fussy. They get 7-gallon containers, so I don't need to give them as much space as the bigger plants like the watermelon or the um, the zucchini. But even a 7-gallon grow bag, those Tasmanian chocolates do really well, and they'll get a couple dozen fruits per plant at least. So staying in the tomato family, that's a slicer tomato. This is right here is called Little Bites Cherry Tomato. Tomato, another container variety. These ones will put out. It's a small dwarf plant. I'll show you a photo. The photo doesn't do it justice. This plant will get about 2 feet tall. I'll use a 2.5 foot tall bamboo stake to support the main stem of this tomato plant. This tomato plant will put out at least 120 to 150 cherry tomatoes through its growing cycle. It's a determinate, so they come all on at once. And from what I've seen in my experience with this variety in the past is they got one flush. They'll kind of do the reset. They'll flower again towards September, and then it'll start producing. But since it's Minnesota and we're so far north, the plant will slow down when we get to September, and I won't get a full crop. They'll have fruits, but a lot of them won't be mature enough to ripen, even if I was to harvest them and bring them inside. That's just kind of the nature of where we're at, how far north we are. But that plant will produce like a crazy plant. I've been very impressed with it. There's a sunflower variety called Music Box. This is a pretty cool plant. I put these in 5-gallon grow bags, so this is a very good container. It's a dwarf plant, so it's not like those giant sunflowers that get 10, 12 feet tall. It's a very nice little container variety that has some pretty cool looking petals on it. One of my favorites for the kids And if you got kids at home, I'd encourage you to start with this for pumpkins. They're called mini jack. This is a good container variety too. I put them in 10-gallon containers. The vines will probably get 8 to 10 feet long. So you can either go vertical with them on some type of stake or trellis, or you can just let them sprawl out on the ground. And from my experience with this variety, each plant will probably put out about, mm, I'd say 15 to 20 baby pumpkins per plant. So that's a pretty good estimate, which is a pretty good return on investment for one 10-gallon pot for that. I have lemon cucumbers. If you haven't grown lemon cucumbers before, I'd encourage you to try this one too. They get to be about the size of a baseball, and they're pretty cool. I like slicing these up and throw them on fresh sandwiches. They have a they have a different flavor than a regular slicing cucumber, but they're just a really neat plant, and they're a workhorse too. So they'll put out 2 or 3 dozen lemon cucumbers per plant, and I plant these in a 7-gallon container. Uh, Spring onions. So this is a good spring onion variety. I have a different one too that I'm gonna trial this year, but that's one of my staples that I use every year. If you like herbs, this is arugula, runway arugula. This does really well in containers. That's one of my favorites to grow every year. And then I haven't grown this one in a couple of years. I'm bringing it back for my CSA customers because it's a very cool plant, but it's a watermelon radish. So if you've never grown one of these or if you didn't know about them, the picture on the artwork on this packet does pretty good justice. It's a very cool plant. So this one is going to be later in the year. It takes a while. So most radishes from seed to harvest are usually about 3 weeks, which is one of the quicker plants that you can grow. Easy victory. If you're new to gardening, I would recommend radishes just because of how fast they grow. This one, the watermelon radish, this one's gonna take 2 to 3 times longer than a radish. So this one's typically about 50 to 60 days. But once this thing's ready to harvest, it's a very cool experience. So that's a watermelon radish. Crimson Crunch, I did these last year. I grow these in 3-gallon, yes, 3-gallon grow bags. It was the first year, last year for these as a trial, and I was happy with the performance on them. I have tried French radishes before. Those are the long cylinder type radishes, and I wasn't very happy with them. I don't, I'm not sure. I haven't spent a lot of time to troubleshoot that. I think it might just be how I was planted them. I wasn't planting the seeds deep enough. But those Crimson Crunch last year, I didn't have to do much with them, and they bulbed up very nicely. So I was happy with those. Cilantro. This is the cilantro I've done for the last 6, 7 years. It performs well. Cilantro is a tough crop to grow during the summer. It's a cool season plant. So once we get hot and humid here in Minnesota, cilantro is very hard to keep in its vegetative stage. It wants to immediately go to seed, which if you cook with coriander, then that's probably a good thing because then you'll have coriander. It's actually a coriander plant. That's where cilantro comes from. That's the fun fact of the day. I learned that in my college horticulture herb, medicinal plant, and spice class. So cilantro is the coriander plant. The vegetative stage of it is the cilantro that we know. The saved seed, the spice is the coriander. So it does very well in May and June, and then again September, October in Minnesota, July, August are very difficult to keep it going as a vegetative plant. It wants to bolt and go to seed. My spinach, I do gangbuster spinach. I've been doing this, I think, 6 years now, and the leaves are very large. The flavor is excellent. It does very well here in Minnesota until the heat shows up, which most leafy greens, unless they're bred to do well in heat, they'll go to seed or they'll bolt sometime around end of June, July, definitely in August. A dill. This is the dill variety I grow. This one does really well. I grow these in 1 gallon grow bags, 1 gallon containers. Dill's a popular herb too for my CSA customers. Greek oregano. This one, in fact, I'll just share with you. All my herbs, with very few exceptions, are in 1 gallon containers. So if this is your first year growing food, I'd recommend herb garden. Containers work very well for that, and I do 1 gallons for that. You can certainly go bigger. I just do it 1 gallon for all my herbs because it makes it very easy to manage when I'm distributing containers out to the CSA gardens and my customers. Then I don't have to reinvent the wheel when I have 1 5 gallon container that has like 3 herbs in it. It's just 1 gallon, one herb. It's very easy. I can get it out to the customers. We do edible flowers here too at Makes, and one of them is violas or Johnny Jump Ups. So like I was saying, some cool season herbs and leafy greens, they like cool season. So they're going to do very well in May and June here in Minnesota, and again in September, October. But this plant right here, this viola, is is true for a lot of edible flowers as long as you're continuously harvesting the flowers. So basically, you're taking the flower before it can produce the seed. If you didn't know that, uh, flowers produce seeds. Once it produces the seeds, it biological clock says, "I'm done. I completed the circle of life, and now I don't have to grow anymore." But with these, as well as a lot of edible flowers we grow, as long as you're continuously harvesting the flowers, or let's say it does get away from you and it produces seeds, you can easily deadhead the plant back to, and I've done this in the past where I'll deadhead this plant back to about 2 inches above the soil line, and it kind of shocks the plants, and it thinks that, oh, I need to keep on producing. So then it'll make the next flush. So there's two options there. You can either continuously harvest flowers as it produces them, or if the plant does get away from you, let's say you go on a week-long vacation or a couple weeks vacation in the summer, you come back and the plant's looking like it gave up on life, or it doesn't want to produce anymore, deadhead. So that means just take your scissors or a knife, just chop off the plants to a couple of inches above the soil. It will produce another round of flowers. Butterhead lettuce is popular in my CSA customer gardens. I trialed this last year. They're called Garden Babies. These did very well. So romaine lettuce, I'll just give you the brief rundown on this. Romaine lettuce is that vase shape. It goes vertical, so you can stack those plants closer together. Butterhead, on the flip side of that, it goes horizontal. So I do butterhead lettuce plants in 3 gallon grow bags. And what I was looking for was a smaller butterhead variety to where I could do more in a smaller footprint. And that is this plant right here. So this one will not get a foot in diameter like most of the butterhead lettuces will. It'll get maybe half that, 4 or 5, which means I can pack more of these in a grow bag. Why would I do that? Why would I do that? I do that because root crops like radishes and especially beets. I have one customer that likes beets and butterhead lettuce, and so now I can stack a butterhead lettuce in a 7 gallon grow bag, and then the rest of it's are beets. So if I planted one large butterhead lettuce, it would be that whole container. Then I have to use another container for beets. But since this particular customer likes beets and butterhead lettuce, I can stack the smaller butterhead lettuce together and then mix a root crop with it. So radishes or beets, for instance. Speaking of beets, this is one of my favorite beets, and I this is an acquired taste over the years. I didn't like beets originally when I was younger. It might have just been bad quality beets. I don't know. But I had a lettuce at a finer dining restaurant, I guess, that had golden gourmet beets, and that's this variety right here. I love this variety. If you don't like beets because they taste like dirt, which I originally thought they did, or you'd like to try them, include these, some type of golden gourmet beets, and your taste buds will thank you later. So with a lot of the containers I do, I'm always looking for new determinate or smaller compact dwarf plants, and one of those is called pixie cabbage. This is a cool season plant. This is a great cabbage plant. I grow it in 3-gallon grow bags. So that means it's about 10 inches in diameter, and this plant will stay, it will respect that boundary. It will not get crazy big like you see a lot of the giant cabbage plants. So it's called pixie cabbage. It's a great performer. Since it's a leafy green, it needs more nitrogen than a lot of plants. So if you're wondering about fertilizer regimens, this is one of those plants that's going to need heavy on the nitrogen to finish this life cycle. And all cabbage plants are cool season plants, so don't expect it to be jumping up and down for joy when July rolls around. So that plant, if you respect the plant out dates on the seed packets, you'll do fine. And I found too, if we have a early warm up here in Minnesota, that plant will finish this life cycle just fine. Because by the time the heat shows up, even if that's early June, it's already starting to develop its head on that cabbage plant. So, and so it's just a smaller plant. It's not going to get 2 feet in diameter. Another cabbage variety is Purple Express. It's a purple Napa cabbage. So this has that base shape, kind of like the romaine lettuce, how they grow upright. This is a plant that I've been growing for many years now, and it's a good performer. I do that in 3-gallon bag too. Same fertilizer regimen for both those plants. They need lots of nitrogen. They're gonna do just fine in the cool season. Once the heat warms up, they're gonna say, "I'm out." Broccoli. So another cool season plant. This variety I've been growing for years now. 3-gallon bag again, or 3-gallon container. Again, also you're noticing a theme here, lots of nitrogen. So it needs nitrogen. We're not growing fruits, so you don't need a ton of phosphorus, but it needs a ton of nitrogen. And a clue on those plants that need lots of nitrogen, if your fertilizer in the container or grow bag's not correct, it's going to tell you. And the way it tells you is it's going to start sacrificing the older leaves on that plant to produce the new shoots or new leaves that are at the end of the plant. So what that means is in a broccoli plant, it doesn't have enough nitrogen when the plant's just about ready to grow the florets, the part that we harvest and eat in or we tend to buy at the grocery store. You're going to see the bottom leaves start to discolor, and then at some point they're just going to shrivel up and drop off. That's a clue that that plant needs nitrogen, and nitrogen is one of those elements that it's pretty cool in the plant kingdom. Plants can actually recycle that. So if they don't have enough, but they had enough to start the plant, they'll just shed load so they can finish their life cycle. Because in a plant's life, its main objective is just like any living organism, it needs to reproduce. So it knows that it has a biological clock. It's got to produce those florets to produce the flowers, to produce the seed to finish its life cycle. So lots of nitrogen for the broccoli and cabbage family plants. So I showed you the baby butterhead lettuce. This is another variety of that. This isn't a mini one, so this one's going to be about a foot in diameter. It does really well in containers. I've been growing it for years now. Called Rhapsody. I grow that in 3-gallon grow bags. So lettuce varieties don't need as much nitrogen as the cabbage and broccoli plants of the world, but they still do need nitrogen. I have a couple left from this company. So cauliflower. It's called Amazing Taste. This is another staple that I've been growing for years now. Excellent flavor. Again, 3-gallon grow bags. This is a cool plant because it looks just like broccoli. So if you forget to put a tag on it, ask me how I know. You won't know if you're growing broccoli or cauliflower until it starts to grow the final product. This right here. But this is a very good plant to grow in a container, 3 gallons again. And just like I was mentioning with the other plants, the broccoli and the cabbages of the world needs lots of nitrogen. And same thing too. If you don't have enough nitrogen for that plant, it's just going to say, okay, well, I'll just shed off the other leaves. There's another part to this equation too. So if, let's say you have that cauliflower plant, there's not enough nitrogen in the container. It gets to the point where it needs to keep making progress so it can grow that floret, so it can flower seed. If it needs to start sacrificing itself to produce the end product, that means it's making a compromise. There's not as many leaves for photosynthesis to make sugars, and what's going to end up resulting is you're not going to have as big a final product. So this actually holds true with a lot of plants. If they have to self-sacrifice to finish their life cycle, or they're stressed in any way, whether it be maybe they're in a shady spot towards the end of their life, or maybe a drought, or maybe they just don't have a couple nutrients they need, like maybe potassium or nitrogen, they're still going to finish their life cycle. They're not going to be happy. And unhappy plants don't make the happiest fruit that we like to enjoy eating. So that's my word of advice is to really up your level of growing successful, great harvests, a great harvest and great quality fruits. The plant needs to be happy. And there's always a couple exceptions to the rule, right? So one of those exceptions are certain fruiting plants. So strawberries in particular, if you don't stress these plants out or induce a little bit of stress, they're going to be very happy, which sounds good. But in the case of strawberries, if they get too happy since they're a perennial plant, they may not produce flowers that result in strawberries as much. So what I've done in the past is when I sell strawberry plants retail, I'll actually induce a little bit of stress, or you can call it tough love, where I will intentionally not let the plant completely dry out, but I'll intentionally underwater it so the plant gets stressed. That signals the plant that it needs to produce flowers to produce the strawberries that I want to eat. Or in my case, I want to produce the flowers that produce the strawberries so it's easier to sell at retail. And then once it starts the flowering cycle, it can't go back to the vegetative stage for that year, if that makes sense. That's a really cool key part of growing food is once a plant progresses from one stage to the next, so in this case goes from vegetative to flowering, it can't go back to vegetative stage. It's already committed to making flowers and fruit, and it's going to continue to do that. So after I see signals or cues from the plant that it's saying, okay, fine, I'll get off my butt and I'll start producing flowers and fruit. That's when I bring the water back and make sure the nutrients are correct because it needs that to produce good quality fruits that I want to eat. Another herb that is a good one to grow in a cool season climate, and even if you're in a warm season climate, I have experience in growing zones 3 through 5. So I would assume this is probably better in a southern climate, but I don't know. So don't hold me to that. But for zones 3 through 5, this plant does well. A parsley plant. It's an Italian parsley. What's cool about this plant, unlike cilantro, I'm not knocking cilantro. It's just a different type of plant. So parsley is a biennial, and what that means is that whatever conditions we have in Minnesota, whatever unfavorable conditions we have at the time for cilantro, like I said, when July rolls around, cilantro it's not going to be around in the vegetative stage. It's going to flower and it's going to produce seeds, and then it's going to say I'm out. But with the parsley, this plant, since it's a biennial, it has a 2-year life cycle, which means when I plant this out this year, this plant will not go to seed. Well, it should not go to seed. If I severely stress this plant out, I have seen that with biennials, they will go to flower and seed. But this plant right here, as long as it gets enough water and sun, it doesn't care about the heat. It knows that it needs to produce vegetative vegetation this year, so it can build a good base. It'll go to sleep over winter, and the next year it'll go to flower and seed. That's true for all biennials. The nice thing about this is that you plant one of these seeds, and you're gonna have parsley all season long until we get enough of a frost to where it's gonna kill it. And then there's always, of course, workarounds to where you can extend the season by using frost blankets, or if you have a container, you can bring the container in. But this one right here, this is a very good variety to start off if you like parsley. And you don't have to worry about it going to seed like other annuals. And then for chard, I love chard because I consider this fancy spinach, and it's got a great flavor too. It looks cool. But if you haven't done rainbow chard, if you like the spinach flavor, I recommend this. It does well in containers. I do 3-gallon grow bags or 3-gallon container with these plants, and I go three of these plants in a 3-gallon container. So that's the math and the spacing for that. And with containers, it's very important to respect the space because the container is all that plant's going to get. So if you overplant the container, the plants that are in that container are going to be fighting each other for nutrients. And if you want to see like a WWE wrestling version, a SmackDown or something, then by all means overplant the container and you can see what happens, but they're going to be fighting each other. Okay, so that's Renee's. This one just showed up yesterday. This is from Johnny's. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, carrots. So carrots, if you haven't grown carrots, carrots are a harder plant to grow. And part of that is because they need some environmental cues or signals that other plants don't need. For one, carrots need some light, so you never want to plant carrot seeds deep. If you do, it's very likely they're not going to germinate and come to life because they need sunlight to germinate or come to life. Other thing with carrots is they take a they take a ridiculous time to germinate as it is. So don't be surprised if it takes the better part of 3 weeks. So 21 days is a very good rule of thumb on carrots. And what that means is that for 21 days after you water your carrot seeds, and once you start the activation process or they get water, they have the warmth, they're going to start coming out of dormancy. If at any point in time something happens to the water, let's say the first week or even 2 weeks go by, you've been very diligent on watering the carrot seeds, but like I said, they need the better part of 3 weeks to come to life, to where you actually see a vegetative sprout coming out of the seed. If you see it at all, I mean, the seeds are very, very small. If any time during that period the seed dries out, it's game over. It's instant death. It's very unlikely that plant's going to survive or the seed's going to survive. And that's kind of depressing when you think about it, because if you invest 3 weeks of your life and you miss like a couple of days of watering or the environment changed, uh, you just lost a couple of weeks of your life you're never going to get back. So there are workarounds. There are ways you can increase the odds of having successful germination on carrot seeds, but just know out of the gate, they take a ridiculous long time to germinate as it is. They need consistent conditions, water being one of the major ones. I grow carrots in grow bags, containers, and they do fine, but I go with wider bags that are shallow. So I have two different types of containers. I have the tall ones, and then I have fat, short ones. And carrots work well in the short, fat ones. I also use what's called pelletized seeds. So this one's called Mokum. Trying to get this up where you can see the label. Mokum F1. You see it's a hybrid early carrot. So this is about 50 days, 50 days for this carrot to go from the start to the end of its life. It's not entirely true because, like I said, it takes the better part of 3 weeks for them to germinate. So you're really looking maybe 3 months. I start these super early here in Minnesota. I actually start these indoors in containers under grow lights, just because I want to get the first round of carrots. I want to give them a successful start. And if I start these inside in the container under grow lights, I control the environment. And like I said, 3 weeks is a very long investment for starting seeds on any plant, but with carrot seeds, it's super critical. Also, there's a couple other things I want to point out. One on this. This tag, you see the date, September 25, and then you see the germination percentage, that 91%. That means 9 out of 100 seeds are most likely not going to come to life. So you have to take that in consideration too with carrots, is that they're not, 100% of what you plant is not going to come back to life. And this was the test that these guys run. The fun fact of this is part of seed law. So any seed company that ships seeds to you from anywhere else in the country, they have to provide that information with the dates, lot number, and then the germination success rate. So the key there is always plant more than what you need, and you use that percentage right there to give you a rough idea of what you can expect when you plant. So that was one thing I wanted to share with you. The second one is you can see in there this container, it looks like BBs. They look like the size of BBs. I started this a few years ago, and the reason why is carrot seeds are really small, like really small. In fact, there's a lot of plants that the seeds are so small it's very hard to handle them. I went with pelletized seeds for carrots because it makes it very easy to plant in a container. And then there's no guesswork or I'm, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to save labor on the, the post germination period. So if I throw a bunch of carrot seeds in the bag and then let's say 91% of them germinate, if the spacing is weird, then I may have to go back and I may have to spend time actually thinning out carrots. A lot of seed packets will actually have spacing information posted on, not so much this one, but you'll see on a packet where they'll say plant this close and then thin after they've germinated. I can't, I could do this, but I don't do this at all. And that's why I'm heavy on transplanting. So I start in trays, and just about everything we grow here at Mixed Landscapes, we transplant. That's what the seed packet doesn't tell you. So by growing everything in trays or starting everything indoors and then transplanting it to its final home, I don't have to worry about the seed spacing at planting because it doesn't apply to me. I save myself a ton of time because I don't have to go back later and thin those seedlings out to what they need to grow or play nicely with each other. And that is a huge power tip for you if you're starting out growing is especially if you want to start seeds, start start as many seeds as you can before get to that transplant stage and then transplant them to their final home. It'll save you a ton of time because then you don't have to go back and thin. You also have a near 100% success rate on those seedlings. And by that, I mean you're transplanting plants that are thriving, that are doing what they should do, and you don't have the environmental factors that are probably going to cause lower germination rate out in like a field environment or a raised bed. So that's my power move for today is if you are starting seeds, start as many as you can indoors in a controlled climate, get those plants off to the best start that you can, and then transplant the successful seedlings out to their final home. That's like 90% of the battle just to get going for the year. You know exactly what you have in your garden now, and they're all at time of transplant, we're thriving. Of course, there's always environmental factors that come after the fact after transplant, but what I do and what I recommend you do is set your garden up for success as much as you possibly can. Oh, and then the power move for carrots is pelletized seeds are very nice for visually seeing the seeds and easier to handle when you're planting them in containers. And those containers I use 7 gallon short. So as far as volume, 7 gallons, but they're short, wide containers. Another sunflower that I'm growing this year. I've grown this for 4 years, I think now. It's called teddy bear. It's a dwarf plant again, and these are very, very cool plants. So if you haven't seen teddy bear or sunflowers, the first time I saw this plant, I knew immediately I was going to grow that. They have a very fuzzy looking flower, so you got kids, again, this is like a really cool one to grow with kids. I got, let's see my packets here. A lot of these are going to be trials for this year. I haven't grown this in a couple years. I like to rotate my edible flowers as much as I can. This one's calendula. This edible flower also has medicinal qualities too. And my wife knew about this one called orange flash, but calendula is a medicinal plant too. So if you use any type of topical treatment or lotions, my wife knew about it because it's common ingredient in baby lotion. Calendula is where that ingredient comes from, that plant. It's also edible. I have a hybrid broccoli plant I'm gonna trial this year called Gypsy, right there. So the jury's out on that one. Um, I I don't know. We'll see. I always like to trial stuff the first year before I bring it online with the rest of the plants I got. This one's a seedless water variety. This one I did last year, and it did really well. So this is going to be a new staple seedless variety that I have with my CSA gardens. Now, I won't go into the biology of this, but this plant right here needs a pollinator, and the seed information from Johnny is actually specifically says you need a pollinator. So they give, should have it right here. Yeah. So they give these seeds right here. This is a pollinator plant for that seedless watermelon variety. I don't grow these out. Don't tell Johnny's that. The reason why I don't is because I have Mini Love. It's a watermelon. It's a dwarf compact plant called Mini Love. I go vertical with those on trellises. The pollen from Mini Love will pollinate the seedless variety. So that's how I played that game last year. And Mini Love had enough male flowers to pollinate the seedless variety, and I had very good outcome and performance from all those CSA customer gardens. So if you don't have another if you don't have another watermelon variety that you're growing, then you'll definitely need to grow out a pollinator variety so you have successful fruit for your seedless watermelon variety. I have another cherry tomato. This is called Gold Nugget. I've been growing this for years. It's a balanced cherry tomato, which means it's not going to be super sweet, uh, but it does have good flavor. And the thing I like about that is it's a dwarf plant again, and it's going to pump out a ton of cherry tomatoes, and it's going to pump them out early. So that's another thing I look for with Minnesota growing is I look for plants that are going to pump out a lot of the fruit that I need early before the weather changes, or it gets like too hot, too humid, or we have what 120-ish days frost free. So when you have warm season plants like this, I try to find ones that perform as quickly as possible. So I reduce the risk of having crop failures or crops that won't finish their life cycle before the winter shows back up in the fall. This one's going to be a new variety this year that I'm going to be trialing called Sugar Cube. It's a hybrid. It's cantaloupe, so that if this is a successful growing out year for that, I'm gonna add that in the lineup with the watermelons. So I have high hopes for that. We'll see how that goes. I'll probably do a review later in the year on that one called Sugar Cube from Johnny's. Butter Baby. This is another trial I'm running this year. Squash. And then Cinnamon Girl. I've grown this in a few years ago, so I'm bringing this back. This is gonna be a larger pumpkin that I plan on growing a bunch out for the CSAs. So my last cherry tomato variety from Johnny's that showed up is called Sun Gold. Uh, this one is my favorite orange cherry tomato. If you like super high sugar tomatoes, I highly recommend Sun Gold cherry tomatoes. They work very well in containers. All of my tomatoes, with the exclusion of the aromas or the big tomatoes, they all go in 7-gallon grow bags or 7-gallon containers. So Sun Gold 7-gallon container, it's an indeterminate plant. You don't have to worry about it getting like totally crazy out of control because the Minnesota growing season keeps it from going like all over the place. But it is an indeterminate plant, so you need to have some type of trellis or cage, or I use bamboo, 3 bamboo posts that I tie together in a teepee, and then I can attach or tie the shoots of the tomato plant to that to give it some structure. Otherwise, it's just gonna flop over and look pathetic as it's trying to flower and fruit on the ground. Another edible flower I have is called Empress of India. This is a nasturtium. I have been growing nasturtiums since I started this company in 2020, and I love nasturtiums for a bunch of reasons. It's another edible flower, so that's cool. I can eat it. The flowers and the leaves are edible. They have a radishy pepper flavor. So if you've never tried nasturtium, try a nasturtium. It's a pretty cool experience. It has a radishy peppery flavor, so it's a great item to throw into a salad to give like a basically a radish substitute. So that's called nasturtium. Nasturtiums here in Minnesota do really well. They'll grow all season long as you're harvesting those flowers on a regular basis. Like I said earlier about the Johnny Jump Up, the violas, if it gets away from you and starts to go to seed when you're on vacation, it's usually when we're on vacation, right? If it goes to seed, the plant's gonna think that it's done and it's not gonna produce. But just like the other edible flowers, if you deadhead it, it'll start producing flowers again. And then here's a new variety I'm growing this year called Brushstrokes. We'll see how this one does. I expect it to perform like my other violas, which is not really fussy. As long as it gets water and enough sunlight and good fertile soil, it'll do fine. It's a different color, that's why I chose that one this year. Now, all my big bags, I'm at the point where I don't get packets for the bigger stuff like the beans or peas, which is nice about Johnny's because the bigger bulk orders that you make, the less per seed, if that makes sense. So you're basically getting a discount when you buy a higher volume of seeds. So for this year, for snap peas, I have a bunch of different varieties, different colors, different flavors. They all do well in the bags. I make that 2 foot fence trellis arch that I use in the grow bags for the peas to grab on. So cool thing about peas is they send out little tendrils and they try to grab onto anything they can. So I have that little fence arch for them to grab on once they start coming up out of the soil. But this one's called Honey Snap 2. This one is going to be a yellow color sugar snap pea. And these are beans. This is Royal Snap. That's going to be purple snap peas. All these two have been growing for years, so they have really good flavor. This is called Sugar Ann. I've been growing this for years. It's a compact plant, so it'll get a couple feet tall. Puts out really nice, juicy, plump sugar snap peas. And then last year I started doing shelling bees in the fall, and that's this one right here, Maxi Gold. These do really well. That's the pea lineup for this year. And then I got beans in here. So this one right here is called Rock Door. That's a bush bean. It's gonna be yellow. It's got great flavor. It's a very cool looking plant. Does really well in grow bags. Those ones I grow in 7 or 10-gallon short grow bags. And amethyst. This is another bush bean. It's gonna be purple. That plant looks very cool because even the leaves and the stems are gonna have a purple uh, tint to them. It's a great flavor wise bean, not real fussy, And like I said earlier, there's a nice handoff between the peas and the beans in the year. So those beans will come out, and then we go back to peas in the fall. And then the last one, this is a new variety I'm trying this year called Tobago. And the reason I'm doing a trial on this one is because Minnesota's growing weather is kind of reminiscent of us. I call it, it's kind of schizophrenic, especially the last few years, because we could literally go from a frost warning around Mother's Day to 90 degrees a few weeks later, which is kind of insane. But because the grow environment, we can have such wild, extreme swings in temperature, in humidity, in drought, as I, as crazy as that sounds, it can wreak havoc on bean harvests. And last year, I had a lot of customer complaints about beans that would flower and then wouldn't get beans, or they wouldn't fruit or finish their life cycle, which kind of sucks if you want beans. And what was happening is that we were having a flower drop. So if the growing environment isn't appropriate for that plant, in the case of beans, it'll abort the flower because it's not the right growing condition. So the reason why I'm going or trialing this tobacco this year is because I want to see how this performs versus my other ones. And this is going to be like an insurance policy. So if it performs well this year and I have still have problems with the heirloom variety of beans aborting flowers, then that's going to definitely be in the lineup going forward just so my CSA customers have a successful growing experience. And that's what I'm always looking for is how can I stack the odds in my favor or my customers' favor having a successful growing experience regardless of what the growing environment doing, whether that be massive temperature swings, massive swings in humidity, maybe just too many overcast days. Hello, Seattle. I'm from Seattle. I can knock on Seattle. But if we have too many wild changes in the growing environment, plants will react, and it's critical when they're at the flowering, fruiting stage for that environment to be as inviting as possible for that plant to encourage it to finish this life cycle. And sometimes we can't always control. We do have ways to work around to get that plant to or encourage it to finish this life cycle, but sometimes it's not in the cards. Just too too many variables changing too quickly together. The plant says, it, I don't know. I'm done. We're done. I'm not gonna finish my life cycle yet. Some plants it's okay because they'll try again later. So tomatoes, indeterminates, if they have flower drop, it gets stressed out. Once the environment returns to something that's conducive to them finishing their life cycle, then they'll do that. So it's not as detrimental to like an indeterminate tomato as it is to a bush bean, where bush beans doesn't have as long a growing cycle and it's got a narrow window. And since it's a warm season crop and we live in a cool northern state, we don't have as many opportunities for success after if we had a failure window. So all these new varieties we're growing at Meg's Edible Landscapes this year, I'm going to be reviewing them during the growing season and then later this year. So I'm looking forward to an update. But I hope you enjoyed the rollout of the seed varieties that we're growing in 2026. The season starts right now. Even though we're not growing anything right now, we're not starting seeds right now, but we have our seeds. They're sitting here comfortably inside. Here in a couple of weeks, we're actually going to start the process of starting up seedling trays and the activation cycle for the seeds. So once again, if you don't have seeds, go shopping right now. Get them before the mad rush so you get the varieties that you want before the season starts. And I'll see you next weekend. That's going to be one of the last ones before we actually start the actually growing cycle. So next week, again, I plan on talking more about the equipment because all that I'm going to be doing this week is getting the process or the equipment set up so that once the end of this month comes around, we're going to hit the ground running. Seeds go in trays, water, get the grow light set up. It's